What happens when the guy who literally wrote the book on creating order finds his own life completely falling into chaos? I mean, that's the wild question right at the center of Jordan Peterson's Beyond Order. Today, we're going to dive into the incredibly intense personal story that kicked this whole thing off, and we'll break down the very first rule that emerged from it.
Yeah, this book, it's not some collection of abstract thoughts. It's a philosophy that was born out of a truly terrifying personal crisis. And Peterson just throws you right into the deep end, right from the start, with this one single sentence that just drops you straight into the nightmare.
I mean, talk about an opening line, right? It's so jarring, so disorienting, and it instantly tells you, okay, this isn't just theory for him. For Peterson and his family, this was real. It was life and death. And man, does it ever set the stage for everything else in the book. And when you look at the timeline, it's an absolute perfect storm of chaos. First, in March 2019, his wife Tammy gets this devastating terminal diagnosis. Then, just a month later, his own anxiety goes through the roof, and he has this bizarre, severe reaction to a medication he was prescribed. It all just spirals, leading to him being put into a medically induced coma in Russia, and when he wakes up in February 2020, he can barely walk or talk. Just incredible.
So Peterson basically says that this whole ordeal, this trial by fire, wasn't just some dramatic backstory for the book. No, it was the actual filter. The only ideas that survived, the only ones that made it into the final pages, were the ones that didn't break when faced with that kind of intense, real-world suffering.
And you know, it's that journey into the abyss that leads us straight to the book's core idea, its central paradox. It's a concept that really flips the script on his last book, 12 Rules for Life. Because after going through that level of chaos, he came to a new realization. Order itself can be dangerous too.
And this slide really shows you that shift perfectly. Think of it this way. If 12 Rules for Life was about building a fortress to keep the chaos out, then Beyond Order is about knowing when you have to open the gates of that fortress. It's a huge warning that too much order, too much structure and control can actually become its own kind of prison. It can trap you, stifle you, and stop you from adapting when the world inevitably changes.
Okay, so this brings us right to Rule I, and it dives headfirst into this whole balancing act between stability and change. The rule itself is, do not carelessly denigrate social institutions or creative achievement.
And this quote is really the key to the whole chapter. What Peterson's getting at here is that our minds, they don't operate in a vacuum. It's kind of like your brain is a computer, and to keep it from getting buggy or crashing, it needs to be connected to a network to constantly check its work, right? Well, for us humans, that network is everybody else. It's other people.
We're constantly pinging this human network. Just by talking to someone, we're organizing our own thoughts out loud. And think about it. When you start going down some weird rabbit hole with an idea, what happens? A friend gives you a funny look or asks a simple question, and boom, it's a course correction. All these social structures, our families, our jobs, our friends, they're like the external hard drives that keep our own internal processor from completely crashing.
He gives this really powerful example from his clinical practice. He had a client who was so cut off from that social network that his mind was just a total mess. And for years, all they did in their sessions was the client would talk and Peterson would just listen. And that simple act of being heard, of finally plugging back into the network, was what allowed this guy to slowly, piece by piece, put his world back together. It's an amazing story.
So, the big question is, if these social structures are so essential for our sanity, how do we actually navigate them successfully? Well, Peterson says we have to learn how to play 3 fundamental roles, and we often have to play them at different points in our lives.
First up, you have the role of the beginner, which he symbolizes with the archetype of the fool. Now, the fool isn't an idiot, not at all. The fool is the person who's brave enough to say, I don't know anything. Just think about your first day at any new job. You have to be willing to ask the silly questions and look a little clueless if you ever want to actually become good at it. That humility, that willingness to be the fool for a while, that's the non-negotiable price of entry for mastering anything. And he tells this great little story about a young, kind of cynical waiter who just decided one day to fully embrace this role. He ditched the attitude, he dropped the arrogance, and just committed to being the absolute best waiter he could possibly be. And the result? He got promoted 3 times in 6 months. Simply by accepting where he was, at the bottom, and playing that beginner role well, he opened up doors that were completely invisible to him before.
All right, the second role is the peer. This is when you're an equal among equals. This is where we all learn that really tricky dance of reciprocity, right? How to negotiate, when to compromise, how to really listen, and even when to step up and lead. It's in our friendships and our relationships with colleagues that we figure out that give and take that is just so crucial for our mental well-being.
And that brings us to the final role, the authority. And he makes a really important distinction here between authority and power. See, a bully has power. They make people do things through threats. But a great teacher or a respected leader, they have authority. People follow them willingly because they can see that they're competent and that their guidance actually helps everyone. So true authority isn't about force. It's competence that you've earned that serves the greater good.
So let's put this all together. If we have to respect these institutions, these hierarchies led by people with real authority, but we also have to admit that those same institutions can get old, rigid, and even corrupt, well, now we've arrived at the final core challenge of this rule, and that's the balancing act between stability and change. He frames this as this fundamental tension, almost like two forces pulling in opposite directions. You've got the conservative impulse, which is all about protecting us by holding on to what's worked in the past, and then you have the creative impulse, which saves us by tearing down and rebuilding what's broken or outdated. And we need both. But look, this isn't just about politics. This is deeply personal. It's that classic choice, right? The stable, safe career versus the risky passion project. You need both of those impulses inside you to navigate life properly. And so we're left with the question that sits right at the heart of this rule, and it's a question that never really goes away. It's not about just picking a side, conservative or creative. It's about trying to find the wisdom to know when to play by the rules, because we need those rules to stay sane and keep society from falling apart. And when do we have a moral duty to stand up and challenge those very same rules to make things better? So the real question is, how do you try to strike that balance in your own life?